Hi, my name's Alicia with Alicia's YouTube Ministries, and I am talking about cult awareness. And this topic is very important. Many believers today believe that cult awareness isn't really necessary because if you go to church regularly and you search the scriptures, that it's as simple as that and you shouldn't be deceived. But it's really not that simple. A lot of people get involved in cults because they don't know how to protect themselves, because they don't know what they are doing. So that's why I am doing this. I have been doing cult research since I was 17 years old. Why did I start so young, you ask? Well, very simply, my parents were originally concerned that I would get involved in a cult because for most of my life till I got in high school, I suffered from rejection, and they thought that I wouldn't have enough discernment to overcome my felt need and want for acceptance, and that I would look for it at any cost. And so I started researching cults so that I would know what was out there so that I could protect myself when the time came. And my most used websites have been, and I strongly suggest going to these if you're going to do cult research, is cultwatch.com and watchmen.org. Both are very, very good websites, and I'll explain more about them later. But anyhow, I've been in some false churches myself. The first one, I had no idea they taught false doctrine until months after I joined, and then one of the people basically mentioned that basically told me hell is a state of mind, not an actual place. And after she said that, I knew that they were teaching false doctrine and I needed to get out. The second one, well, I gave them a chance and I knew instantly it must have been a cult because they were teaching perfectionism stuff. But then I ended up staying because I thought I could just agree to disagree, but then it got out of hand. Then, of course, the third one I shouldn't have gone to in the first place. I knew beforehand it was a cult, but I was doing some research on a certain topic, and I went anyway. And then I stayed way longer than I should have. And the last straw was finally when he said from his pulpit that babies that get aborted will be shipped UPS straight to hell. And that's when I decided enough was enough. But I should have never gone in the first place. But I've learned enough both from my cult research and from my first-hand experience that I feel qualified to teach on this series, and I feel it's a very important series. This is also very important for teenagers who may be going to college out of town, and or people who might have to move to get a job, particularly if they're in their 20s. And some people get the idea that people are entirely too complacent. They're like, they automatically assume they'll be at the same church they've been attending since they were a child all their life. But you don't know. God can lead you anywhere. And I remember when I was 17, I felt it'd be a good experience and good practice if every once in a while, about once a month, I visited a different church and put the principles of searching the scriptures and all that into practice so that I would know what I was doing if I ever had to move. Well, some of the youth workers, they got all worried and stuff, and I said, I want to be prepared in case I end up moving for college or a job, because you never know where God leads. And they said, well, you're right, you never know where God might lead. He might have you stay here and attend this church for the rest of your life. Lingo for meaning, I don't think that's going to happen. But that's complacency, folks. People aren't prepared. Or another thing they do is say, we'll just stay within the same denomination. But honey, you don't understand. They may or may not have that denomination in the area of town that you are moving to. Or if they do, you might have to drive 50 miles out just to go to that church. And so then you may find yourself going to having to go to another denomination if you can't afford the gas money. And so you'll need to know what you are doing. Now, most places do have Baptist churches, and like the West and East areas have Assembly of God, and Catholic is very predominant in some areas, and a lot of places have Methodist and Church of Christ. But my point is, you can never be too careful. You have to, it's so very important to know what you are doing. And so that's why I started practicing, and what I would do for practice before I went is I would always look online and look at their belief statement, and if I couldn't find a belief statement, I would go and listen very carefully, and I would search the scriptures to see if they could back themselves up in that whole 9 yards, and the whole 9 yards. And of course, I've also learned discernment is good, because sometimes they can make themselves sound scriptural when they're not. And again, that goes in with knowing what you are doing. And so that's why I think it's so important to teach on this. And so the topic areas I'm going to cover is, first I'm going to bring up some good resources to go to. That'll be short. And then I'll bring up some of the major cults. Most of them are pretty popular. Mormonism, or well known, I should say. Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Christian Science, the Unification Church, also known as the Moonies. Mostly centered in Asia, but I think some of them are coming over here. The Rastafarians, mostly centered in Ethiopia, but you never know, they might move over here. The ICC, short for International Church of Christ. It should be known that not every place that has the label Church of Christ on it is ICC. Usually if it's ICC, they will say so plainly, because they're that proud of their label. And maybe a few other ones, and then I will talk about ways to protect yourself. I will talk about what to do if you discover that you are in a cult, and then I will talk about ways to prevent yourself from getting involved in one, and what to do if you have a family, friend, or loved one involved in one. And also, if you have teenage relatives that are about to go to college or graduate from college and get new jobs or whatever, I'll also talk about what you can do to protect them and help lessen the likelihood that they find themselves involved in a cult because they don't know what they believe, and among other things. But first, I should start with misconceptions of a cult and definitions of a cult. Typical definitions. Now, these are typical for religious cults in particular, so I will read them. There's 10 points. The first one is an abrupt break with historic Christianity and its confessions. Cults usually view historical Christianity as being off base for all those centuries since Christ until their founder came along. I want to mention though that while these are good definitions, I'm reading off these 10 points, they're mostly cults that are based out of that claim Christianity as their base, but there are also religious cults that don't claim Christianity as their base, and then there are cults that are not religious in nature. More on that later. But for now, these definitions are very good for cults that claim Christianity as their base. I already said abrupt break with historic Christianity and its confessions. Autosotericism. This is theologian lingo for self-salvation. Cults usually specify that salvation is obtained by following certain rules and regulations, those that are specified by the cult. And I would also add, you got to be a part of their cult to be saved. And that any other group, a deficient Christology. Christianity is premised on the belief that Jesus is God. If he is something less than God, then salvation by his death on the cross wouldn't work. Cults, however, generally take a lesser view of Christ. They might admire him and view him as greater than a human, but they don't consider him as the one true God. Although I would add, this is more modern day cults, but it used to be that they view Jesus as God but not man. And I think the Gnostics still believe that. I know they're still around, but most cults view him as human but not God. Anyways, then there's syncretism. This is more theological jargon that simply means the blending of different elements from several religions into one synthesized belief system. An emphasis on their own distinctive. Rather than stressing the major doctrinal points of Christianity, a cult will put disproportionate emphasis on its distinguishing doctrines. Those things that mainline Christianity considers to be essential take a backseat to the cult's unique characteristics. Things like salvation by grace through faith, for instance. Perfectionism. Most cults teach that it is possible for a human to be perfect, a doctrine that flies in the face of Christianity's view that humans are sinful and can never achieve God's standard of perfection. Moral perfection is usually attainable by following the cult's prescribed conduct, doing some things and abstaining from other, and by adhering to the teachings of the cult's founder and leaders. This perfectionism thing you will especially find in holiness Pentecostalism, especially Apostolic and Oneness Pentecostal, and United Pentecostal. They're kind of all under one umbrella, but I'm not sure if they're one and the same or different, so I'm going to cover all my bases there. And then an extra biblical source of authority. While many cults recognize the Bible as a sacred piece of literature, they have additional holy books. These other writings usually take precedence over the Bible, or they at least give the authoritative interpretation of the Bible. If there is a conflict between the two, the Bible comes in second place. I would add that there is an exception to this rule. Holiness Pentecostalism is an exception to this rule. They usually just hold to the Bible, but their extra source is usually their pastor. They claim that disobeying their pastor is the same as disobeying God, and it's even on things that is common sense. Like, for instance, if your pastor says that you should be on the side of the road that you're planning to turn from. You know, most pastors might say that as friendly advice, but most people would acknowledge that's just common sense. Duh. You don't need God to tell you that. But in Holiness Pentecostalism, if the pastor says it, it's a revelation from God, and not being in the lane you're supposed to be in is a cause for damnation. And that's just an example. Basically anything you do in Holiness Pentecostalism can get you damned to hell. But that's in a lot of cults. But that sort of goes back to autosotericism, self-salvation, what I was talking about. And then there's number 8, a belief in exclusive community salvation. A cult teaches that it is the only true church. Unless you believe all of its teachings, you won't be saved. In contrast, a sect of traditional Christianity won't claim exclusive rights to salvation. Most denominational differences don't pertain to the qualifications for salvation. According to the prevailing Christian viewpoint, joining a particular denomination is not a prerequisite to get to heaven. For most cults, however, you won't make it unless you are one of their members. What's wrong? A preoccupation with eschatology. This is the study of the end of the world. In the perspective of the timelines of Christianity, most cults are brand new, having been founded after Christianity had been rolling along 1800 years or so, more like 2000, but I won't go into that. Cults often explain that their bounder, or should say founder, I'm reading off a packet here, brought the last word from God to prepare mankind for the end of the world. With this perspective, cults often emphasize urgency about the end of the world. You'll see this in Holiness Pentecostal, Jehovah's Witness, Seventh-day Adventist, and a few others, and esotericism. Something is esoteric if it is beyond the knowledge of what most people and understood by only a select group of individuals. This is what separates cults from traditional Christianity. Each cult claims that its founder and/or leaders have access to special truth that was previously hidden. For example, that's true in Mormonism, and I want to go exclusive community salvation. That's pretty much all of them, and emphasis on their own distinctive, syncretism, deficient. This less than God, you'll definitely see that in Jehovah's Witness, because they believe him to be man but not God. And these first two, well, yes. But anyways, and and those definitions were given by theologians Dr. R.C. Sproul and Tim Couch. And I want to remind you once again that those definitions are mostly for cults that claim Christianity as their base. They're not really for cults that don't claim Christianity as their base or don't have a religious base at all. And there are plenty of those. And different types of cults. There's religious cults. There's also commercial cults. You can also call them business cults. And there's self-help and counseling. And then there's political. And I'll go more over those definitions in the next video.